Good morning, welcome to the Big Questions from Manor Church of England Academy in York. I'm Nicky Campbell. On Thursday, Justin Welby was enthroned as Archbishop of Canterbury. He's the 105th priest to hold that office in a line stretching all the way back to St Augustine in 597. Well, Augustine's task was to convert the English to Christianity. Archbishop Welby has to justify the privileged position of the Church of England in a society that is increasingly non-religious or non-Christian. So this morning we're asking just one very big question. Should Britain become a secular state? To debate this, we've assembled distinguished philosophers, secularists, humanists, churchmen and believers from various faiths on both sides. And they'll be encouraged by our very lively York audience. And you can join in too via Twitter, or you can log on to bbc.co.uk/thebigquestions, where you'll find links to continue the discussion online. 1.7 million people in a month, apparently. But to listen, this is the thing: people in a true secular society, people are neither advantaged or disadvantaged because of their belief or lack of it.
Absolutely not true. Because if you actually look at France, which is a constitutionally secular country, you find the tyranny of secularism. Yeah. So in a country where people can dress as they wish, Muslim women are not allowed to dress as they wish because the state dictates it.
But it needn't be. We have a very different country. It needn't be, as you describe it, a tyranny of secularism here. You should be arguing, should you not, Baroness, in favour of secularism, because in all religions, including your own, are given equal status.
But I think that in Christianity there is understanding of a faith that decides people to take different paths. In secularism, there is actually an understanding of no faith, and therefore people of all faith are marginalised and feel actually disempowered.
We're talking about different forms of secularism.
Well, hang on, Jonathan and May, we hear this a lot, Rabbi Doctor. We hear this a lot. This is what the secularism means to a significant amount of people. It means the onward march of what they describe as militant atheism.
Firstly, the United States, where there's a complete separation of church and state, and yet all faiths and those of no faith are equal. Plus, religion, as it happens, is flourishing. And not only that, don't take the word of New York and Washington. What about the Bible? I mean, the Bible has an interesting scenario where those who were involved in the power structure, the priests, got corrupted by it, whereas those who maintained their independence and were outside of the structure, the prophets, they were the ones with the moral integrity, and that's where we want religion to flourish.
Let's talk about I think if we may talk about USA and France, it's very interesting because you have two different officially secular societies, but you have two very different outcomes, don't you? Yeah. In the US, you've got a flourishing of religions and sects, not all of them benign, arguably because it's not within the state structure. And in France, of course, you have this sort of openly expressed hostility, Miriam, don't you, to religion from people and to the displaying of religious symbols. And you've lived in France.
Well, we have that today, but in some defence, if I might, of the country from which I hail, originally secularism, of course, was to create a state which was no longer under the tyranny of the Catholic Church.
Can I read from the French Constitution, actually?
Which would give equal access to all citizens.
I think it might be quite useful. This is in the French Constitution, 1958. The Republic neither recognises nor salaries nor subsidises any religion.
And at the same time that the laws came in about secularism, in order to give equal access to all citizens, there was instated a law giving freedom of conscience to all citizens, so freedom of religion. But obviously what we see today, to me, is not secularism. I don't think that secularism in and of itself is a problem in France or here. I think we've got a much more sensible secularism in Britain, which is a gradual secularism. But of course, France has a history, which is of a revolution, And for every reaction, there is a reaction. So the reaction against the Catholic Church developed into a hostility against Catholicism. And then, of course, because of France's history, which I think, there more than latent racism, that's become essentially used, secularism has been used as a cover to justify a lot of racism within French society today. So for me, the issue isn't really so much that secularism the problem, it's a redefinition of secularism to justify a type of racism.
Great hostility to the...
This is such an idealized view of the French Revolution. I mean, that was also, the question was asked, when have secularists killed anyone? Well, have you ever heard of Robespierre?
Well,
I mean, the tyranny of the Catholic Church. What was the tyranny of the Catholic Church was nothing compared to what the French Revolution did. Thousands of priests, even nuns, were taken to the guillotine.
But that's not secularism then. Surely then that's not secularism, because secularism doesn't privilege any religion.
You are making up definitions of secularism. I mean, secular ideology has been responsible for far more suffering
nonsense.
Okay, A.C. Grayling. Wait.
Has ever been.
A.C. Grayling, I wanted to come to the audience. Was the French Revolution a secularist revolution?
No, not at all. there was worship of the supreme being, worship of the goddess of reason, and so on.
That is what you worship as well. Yeah.
Where is she this morning?
During the 2 or 3 years of the worst successes of the French Revolution, under whatever name they happened, they pale into comparison with the centuries and centuries and centuries of oppression and tyranny and hardship imposed by religions, including your own, throughout European
What about
history.
secular ideologies? National Socialism, Stalinism, Mao, Pol Pot, even Saddam Hussein, I mean, secular ideology has got very bloody hands indeed.
I'd like to agree with Bishop Nazir Ali to the extent that, yes, in the name of suppressing religion, many regimes through the ages have bloody hands, but also agree with Professor Grayling that we have centuries of religious ideologies that had bloody hands in the past and have bloody hands today. That is the issue. And also to agree with Mariam to the extent that I think that a lot of the discussions on the French state are misconceived. There is a lot of racism in France. And we may disagree on precisely where that racism lies, because even though there's racism, and specifically directed against Muslims in France, as there is in Britain, there are also French Muslims who fight in the name of the French Republic for their equal rights, including the former Mufti of the Grand Mosque in Marseille, who is a secularist and a believer, but a secularist on the French model.
Just as we have people here, Simon and Jonathan, who are believers and who are secularists. But what is happening to, for example, the religious displays in France?
I mean, from 2004...
The hijab and the burqa. And
you weren't allowed to wear so-called ostensible signs, religious symbols in schools, allegedly in the name of women's rights and defending secularism. But what it actually led to was many young girls not being able to access education. Now, if you want to talk about fundamental values, how about free access to education for all citizens in a society? So that was one. But when I say that secularism has then been misused in France, it's now being used as a way to sort of eradicate religion from the public sphere.
So has it fed what some people refer to as Islamophobia? Has it fed
I think so, and perhaps not just Islamophobia, an intolerance of religion in the public sphere. So now that we've seen, for example, laws brought in which say that mothers of pupils who wear headscarves can't attend school events because of their headscarves. We've seen women in niqabs attacked in the street. And this is all essentially vindicated because of the laws. The laws empower people to think that they have a right to then take out their vitriol on people in the street.
So Mark, if I may...
The law doesn't do anything about women who don't choose to cover and who are under huge pressure to cover. And nobody says anything about it. There are councils in this... It's not just a matter... The point is it's not the matter of choice. Women who... How do you decide genuine choice? In a situation where people are harassed, hugely harassed. If they convert out of Islam, they're harassed. If they become Christians. I, as an atheist and a secularist, spend a lot of my time defending people against religious persecution. And you find religious persecution from various communities against other communities. And South Asian Christians in this country are quite often under threat from other religious communities, and nobody wants to do anything about it.
Can I ask you, Mark, that you're advocating here, you are very strongly arguing for a society that is based on religion, and presumably it would be a society that allows people to display religious symbols, yes?
Well,
would you allow people
not exactly.
to... Oh.
Can I say what I'm in a slightly different
The burqa, the niqab, no?
I'm more in the United States model, where the church should influence policy, should be recognized that by this state, that when it's restraining evil, it's restraining evil as given by our Maker, God.
Would you defend people's right to wear the niqab and the burqa as a display, as a religious, religious symbol?
Provided it fits with public policy concerns. There are times, for example, there was an immigration tribunal where the judge told a lady wearing a niqab that he had to ask her to take it off because otherwise he couldn't see her face and see whether she was telling the truth. And that's a public policy reason for not wearing the niqab. Now, so yes, you have to have limits to religious symbols. Of course you do. Common sense would determine that.
Can I just
agree with that case.
Can I just say that there is a real problem, because we are hijacking both the notion of what faith is and the notion of what secularism is. What the Iranians are doing is against Islam, because Islamic teaching accepted all faith that preceded.
We're arguing about what's being done in the name of religion.
But yes,
that's the point. Religion has it's not. Islam may say whatever it says. I don't argue about the nature of the religion. It's the space that's given.
Okay, Baroness Hafsa.
Just as religion has been hijacked, so has secularism. So that in name of secularism, in France, Islamophobia is now rampant. That is to say, you really are going to have difficulties as a Muslim to attend school ceremonies, to actually appear in the public, and you have people arresting you in front of the Notre Dame because you happen to be covered. Now, and not niqab, just having just a headscarf. So that you're actually confining Muslim women to the four walls that supposedly some Muslim tried to confine Muslim women to the four walls within the home. And it's both hijacked.
Some hands have gone up. Wait a minute, everyone. Some hands have gone up. Let's see from the audience. And Naomi, I'll come to you in just a second. Good morning.
Good morning. It's very interesting how the debate has turned on to Islamophobia when really we're talking about the influence of religion, of any religion, in the public sphere. That's the essence of secularism, and that's the issue we're talking about today. What secularism decides is that no religion, whether it's Islam, Hinduism, Christianity, Judaism, has any role in the public sphere. So, for example, we're talking about France, where there's a growth with the growth in Islamic faith, as there is in the UK. It's very easy to target a Muslim in particular, especially a Muslim woman, because she overtly has a different, she has to wear the headscarf and the niqab. No, she doesn't have to. But no, it is a choice. But you are easily targetable because of that. That is secularism at its worst, because it does not tolerate the religious aspect in the public sphere.
Okay, let's talk about that. Yes, and you had right in the back first of all. Good morning. We'll get on to that definition in a second. Good morning.
I do agree with Bishop, because the constitution and monarchy of this country is based on Christian religion and principles, and when we're trying to take that rules and regulation and that foundation of this country, out of content of being a secular country, we are actually opening to danger and open to being lawless nation. Also, I do agree with, Dr. Jonathan, the fact that, we are already a secular country. Yeah, we can say that to a certain extent, that we're already a secular country, but there is equal right and there is human right in this country that gives people the right to, express themselves. So in a way, we need to look at what found the nation. Are we taking, the principle of the country out of content so that we can make people happy? Okay. Then, that needs to be looked into.
Okay, and Naomi, what about the example of France? Has it given secularism a bad name?
Well, my kind of interest is particularly in this country, and first of all I'd like to say that this idea that all of our values and our laws and our systems and our justice is comes from Christianity is simply not true, and it's preposterous.
Well, this is again an assertion. Can you give us some examples of why?
What I would like to say is that people who are against secularism in this country are wishing and seeking to retain a privilege for for an established church, despite the fact that people are clearly... Despite the fact that people are leaving Christianity in droves, despite the fact that people are leaving Christianity in droves, the church still wishes to have its privileges by sitting in Parliament over our laws, by controlling a third of our state-funded schools, and all those sorts of things, to wish to have influence on things like stopping gay and lesbian people from having full equality, etc., etc. You know, actually, secularism would get rid of that privilege, allow the church and people who are Christians to do what they want. You know, this, what was being said before, secularism is actually very good for religious people because it doesn't enforce
Secularism is very good for religious people because it makes all religious people equal. No particular credo is privileged. That's the argument.
I'm sorry, but they're acting as if there's only one kind of secularity, okay? And you are talking about secularism, which is an ideological viewpoint. Being secular involves being able to draw on various different kinds of worldviews, see the wisdom and see the insights that they give us from different registers of meaning, whether it's immanent or transcendent. Being secular means drawing on a lot of things. Now, A.C. Grayling calls that cherry picking. I call it reflection, and I call it critical thinking.
Yes, can I agree?
Simon Hill, what's your understanding of secularism? Because under Mao, under Stalin, under Hitler, under Torquemada, there was only one way accepted.
Absolutely.
What's your understanding of secularism? It's very different from that, isn't it?
I think secularism can mean two very different things. It can mean a situation like we have in France, in which non-religious belief is privileged, in which religious people are banned from wearing what they choose in public, which is not the sort of secularism I believe in. What I believe in is a situation of religious liberty in which we all have freedom to express our views, practice our religion or live out our non-religion.
On an equal footing.
On an equal footing, and to publicly promote them and campaign for them. And I believe that as a Christian because I don't believe Jesus taught that we should claim privileges for ourselves that are denied to others. That is utterly contrary to Jesus'
What about the core values that have shaped the traditions and history of this country, as argued very articulately by Bishop Nazir Ali, which we will be jettisoning?
Well, some of those values are very different to others. There's always been lots of forms of Christianity. Christianity has inspired people to campaign for justice, to campaign against slavery, against racism. But at the same time, when people say Britain used to be a Christian country, I want to know, was Britain Christian when it was engaged in the slave trade? Was Britain Christian when the British Empire was committing genocide in Tasmania and setting up concentration camps in South Africa? These are things that have been done in the name of Christianity but have nothing in common with the teachings of Jesus, who stood on the side of the market.
I feel when A.C. Grayling, what's your position on the displaying of religious symbols? Because we've seen some cases recently, haven't we, which have come to the European Court.
Well, I think in general, of course, people are perfectly entitled to wear and decorate themselves as they like. What's being missed here is that in the case of both Turkey and France, which are constitutionally secular countries, the request being made to citizens is that when they come into publicly funded spaces like courts and schools and elsewhere, that they come as citizens. They come first and foremost as French or Turkish citizens, and then as men and women. And only after that, whatever their personal choice of outlook or belief happens to be. The thing about some of the religious symbols that people wear, and especially the dress which is so associated with Islam, is that it makes an incredibly loud statement which says, you must treat me according to one chosen identity. And what the French state wants to say...
I'll be with you in a minute. Let him finish.
What the French state is trying to say is, when we provide a public service to everybody, to all our citizens, we treat them just as citizens. And if you're coming to us expecting that we're going to be influenced in one way or another by some identity that you've chosen and want to be regarded as the principal identity, then we want to reassert this point that we're on a level playing field here and everybody is together. And I think that's the underlying point. Now, in practice, of course, it has resulted in blinding the state wrongly to many of the different needs that people might have. In the great projet outside Paris, for example, immigrant communities where discrimination and lack of educational opportunities and job opportunities are hidden behind this different veil. And that is a problem with all veiling. So I think what we need to do is to try to get the intention right, to try to understand that there is a very positive intention behind it, even though we in this country would be much more generous
and tolerant. Miriam.
Positive or paternalistic? Paternalistic is what it sounds like to me. Let me tell you, you're assuming that somebody wearing a headscarf wants to have their identity filtered through that premise at all times, and I can tell you for a fact that that's not true. Secondly, I think you're misrepresenting what the French state is attempting to do through the secularist project in its essence, which wasn't that when you come into school as a pupil that you have to be devoid of religious identity, but it is that the school itself should not impose any particular religious or ideological outlook, and that in that sense it should reflect the diversity of its citizenship. What you're essentially supporting is the ideological outlook of a very small minority of typically white men in power who then get to impose their understanding of what citizenship means to what is now a very diverse citizenship. The Assemblée Nationale is over 80% white men. These are the men dictating to brown women, typically, what they can and can't wear.
For years and years, I belonged to a group called Southall Black Sisters in this country, which had to fight for the rights of minority women. And a lot of those struggles are now being characterized in the way in which you're mischaracterizing those struggles. Now in France, there were similar groups, Ni Put Ni Soumise was one, and other groups of French women from Muslim backgrounds, some of whom may have been believers, some of whom were not, who were arguing around the issues of the veil in school and so on. And some of them felt that they didn't go as far as wanting to the burqa ban on the street. So there are a lot of different opinions among French Muslims on it. It isn't just some, yes, there's a racist discourse as well. There are a lot of very complex discourses going on at the same time. But let's understand what's happening with the issue of veiling is that it is being, however much young women or older women say they choose to adopt it, there's also a strong push by Muslim fundamentalist organizations to declare the veil mandatory. And they have issued British
Bishop Nazir Ali, well, I heard you just as we were talking over there about the frowning on and the banning of religious symbols, saying this is where secularism leads. You said
yes, that. I did. And I mean, Professor Grayling's description of what happens in Turkey or France shows that this kind of secularism is also an ideology. It has a particular view of human beings. He is telling religious people to leave their religion behind when they come into certain spaces.
Okay, what about America, where we have a secular society is separate, a wall between church and state, and religion thrives.
Let me say, the United States has a separation of church and state. That does not mean it is a secular society. Have you ever read the Declaration of Independence?
Exactly.
It begins with the divine providence for human beings and human society.
The US is a polarized state.
Yes, you mustn't confuse separation of church and state with a secular society. It can this is what I'm trying to argue for Britain. I am not arguing for the privileging of any church. I have resigned as a diocesan bishop. I have no privileges. What I am arguing for is the privileging of a legal and constitutional tradition without which we will be set on waters that we will not be able to navigate.
We will not be able to navigate those waters.
Are you arguing for the disestablishment?
AC Grayling, faith schools are acknowledged by many people to be very good schools.
I'm afraid for me the phrase faith school sounds like an oxymoron, a paradox, because an educational institution should exist to teach people how to think, not what to think. And the very concept of a faith school is that one way or another, even if it is a school which lets in people of other faiths or none, is going to have as much as it can in the way of tendentiousness. Now, if you only look at the school that we're in at the moment, it's got a massive crucifix on the front wall. All around the school there are Lord's Prayer and quotations from the Bible. I mean, it's crammed down your throat in this school. I was astonished when I walked into it because, you know, having read and heard about faith schools being built around the country, I didn't realize how very coercive the presence of such a school might be.
Are those scriptures bad for children?
I do find it dismaying.
Are those scriptures bad for children? Is a picture of a crucifix bad when it shows the self sacrifice of God sending his son to die for us? Is that not a good thing? Is that not a good thing for children to learn?
So what's the Baroness? What are you saying?
No, I just think exposing children to such a violent image.
But it is something that is a peaceful image.
It's a peaceful image. Miriam Francois Serra.
Just briefly. Firstly, I have a son who goes to a Catholic school. And I'm quite happy with him attending a Catholic school. I have no issues with it whatsoever. I haven't found it to be coercive. I haven't found that he's come home and he's preaching to me about Catholicism. What I have found is that the discipline in the school is to a much higher standard to the non-religious primary school that he attended. But that's by the by. I just wanted to make a point that all of the issues to do with the admissions to faith schools don't really undermine the ultimate argument about faith schools in and of themselves, which is that as tax-paying citizens, religious and non-religious people have a right to see schools that reflect their beliefs. And that means accommodating both faith and non-faith schools, which doesn't mean we should accept things like issues with admission, which I would concede, and I do think that there needs to be a fairer admission policy to faith schools. I would like to see faith schools where perhaps 50% of the pupils were of different faiths or no faiths, because there are benefits to the educational outlook of people of faith, which all people should benefit from.
Jonathan.
Surely faith should come from the home, and what they
well, it is. That's why you're sending your child to that school.
And I'm against faith school on faith reasons, because I actually take, like Mark, the Bible seriously. It says love your neighbour as yourself. The only way you can get to know your neighbour is by interacting with him or her.
School should be about education, not
should there then be... Audra is trying... There's no indoctrination, says the Bishop. What does Audra say? Wait a minute. What does Audra say? Let's find out, children.
Thank you. I would like to know why the humanists who place such great emphasis on reason think that children can't think. Why do you believe you say that you want to avoid children being indoctrinated early by religion, but why indoctrinate them early with secularist values such as individualism, high achievement, liberal values? Children can think, and let me tell you, by the time they come to me as students at university, they come with a background having thought about a particular religious background, having been exposed to others and ready to criticize. Now you say that humanism is older than religion, then why is it that these younger traditions have been engaged in self-criticism for hundreds of years and humanism has not yet made that leap? That's what we need to be doing.
A.C. Grayling.
You've forgotten what the Jesuits say. They say, give me the child until the age of 7 and I'll give you the man. They know perfectly well that intellectually defenseless, very, very young children taught as fact all these different faith beliefs by the adults in their community, they are for very good evolutionary reasons credulous. They're going to take seriously what their adults say.
And let me tell you, they can think.
Some people who, when they finally do get to the position where they can think about these things and reason and discover and learn, may have a very, very painful process of disentangling themselves from the imprisonment of the mind. That kind of early faith education.
Bishop Nazirani, the imprisonment, there's a phrase to tangle with on a Sunday morning. The imprisonment of the mind.
Is this why Professor Grayling is starting a school? Is this why? Is he learning from the Jesuits? Well, of course, children need to belong to a tradition in which to think. You don't think in a vacuum. And if he's going to have a school, he's going to have a tradition in which children are going to be taught to think.
I went to a Catholic school.
Let me just finish with one thing. In this country, the church began schools. Secularists did not begin schools. The state did not begin schools.
There was no other show in town back then, was there?
Well, the state was there, but the state is a latecomer to education in this country. It's the church. This school began as a school for poor boys. Poor boys whom no one else was educating at that time. Now, there were schools for girls as well. Yes, there were plenty. Yeah. But in those days, girls and boys were educated separately, for better or for worse. People have different opinions about it. But what I'm saying is the church began the business of schools in this country. So secularists and even the state are latecomers to this matter.
Can you concede to the Baroness?
Can I just say that I actually went to a Catholic school.
Good for you.
Well, yes, but it didn't cause me heartaches.
Are you happy with the new Pope?
I have no idea about the new Pope. The point is, I had to come home and ask my parents whether there were 3 gods, whether there was 1 God, whether God actually died, whether God stayed alive. Pupils think, and you can question it. And I was, I think, 7 years old. And then when my parents said, well, there is a God and the God is a good thing, and they sent me to my grandmother, who happened to be a devout Muslim. And what she told me has stayed with me for life and had stayed with me through my Catholic education.
What did she tell you?
Which she said to me, God is beyond conception, which is why it worries me when people have a microscopic conception of what God is.
Yeah.
The second point for the Baroness. The second point is that God does not need us. We need God. And we find our pathways. And sometimes the pathways is through Catholicism, sometimes it's through Islam. It's us. We are the seekers. And some people, like Professor Groening, doesn't need God. Jolly good for you. But many of us do. And we need to have a state that has an understanding of those who seek God. Because I think there is a real tyranny of secularism.
And that's why
I want to go to a religious person to respond to that. Simon Hill. Okay, we need a state that has an understanding of and an accommodation for those who seek God.
I think I'm finding this debate difficult because we seem to have set up 2 alternatives.
You're not the only one.
On one side, we've got this extreme secularism, such as France, which makes laws about what people can wear in public. On the other side, we've got this idea of, Marx's idea of privileging Christianity, privileging somebody's interpretation, and then describing that as putting God first. What I'm arguing for is religious liberty, which is not saying you can't come into a school wearing your religious symbol. It's not saying you can sit in Parliament if you lead a particular religion. It's saying that religious groups, non-religious groups and positions should be free. People should be free to worship, to engage in debate like this, to hand out leaflets on the street if they wish, not free to discriminate, not free to say you can only teach at our school if you follow our religion, but free to proclaim their views. And that, and that is why I reject the French system.
That's not the real lived experience.
Well, and that's your vision.
Are you quite
that's the vision we can work towards.
And that's the vision which we are going to end on. Thank you all so much indeed for taking part. I'm sure this debate's going to continue on Twitter back after Easter, April the 7th from Oxford. From now, goodbye from everyone here in New York. Thank you for watching.